We're going to start with stances first. Stances are the foundation of the art and the foundation of everything that you build on, whether it be the martial arts or any other endeavor. And as I start with the stances, I think you're going to see why they are so important, because they're not just used as just the word stances. And we're going to find out that nothing in the art of Kenpo is considered to be used on a one-dimension or just a two-dimensional level, but rather on a three-dimensional level. And stances in particular, although we're going to start to use them to hold us in place, hold us up, you're going to find that stances are far more encompassing than just holding you up. You'll find that they are also used, the stance is used as a weapon itself, as a way of maneuvering, and so forth. But we're going to start from the very beginning first. I want you to understand something about learning basics, and particularly stances. And I like to draw an analogy between a teacher, an English teacher. When we were young, we were taught to write. And in school, a teacher would come up to the blackboard, and she would draw her A, which would be primarily linear lines, in block form. And she asked us in the class to also draw that A. Well, obviously, if there's 20 kids in the class, you're going to have 20 different varieties of that A. Each A is going to be a little of that person's self in it as well. But the important thing is not all the A's in class have to look like that teacher's. The important thing is that the A's in the class have to be legible. If they're legible, then the child can learn to write. Likewise with the basics in Kenpo, I'm not asking that perfection be your first endeavor, but I want your basics to be workable, or you might say legible, so that they can be used. And as you progress and you stay in the art, those of you that do stay in it long enough, perfection comes, obviously. And as we go along, your A, or your stance, or your block, or your kick, or whatever strike, will begin to look more like your teacher's. And that's the important thing. With that foundation, then, I'm going to go ahead and start into the first stance. First stance that we're going to work on is called a horse stance. You might say it's like a watched pot never boils. So basically, that's the stance was primarily used in the early stages at that time. Now, there's a number of ways of getting into the stance, one of which is to take your heels, force them out from an attention stance, push your toes out, and then one more time, push your heels out. Okay, now oddly enough, you'll find out that if you do it this way, you'll come pretty close to measuring your stance. Another way to get it a little more technically correct is to have a heel to knee alignment. If you have this heel to knee alignment, then your feet are going to have the proper distance apart from each other. Now that is customizing the horse stance to my height and my build of body. Some people prefer a little wider stance. Okay, this is fine and it can be used, but later on I'm going to show you that if you keep a stance that is knee to heel, it'll be more advantageous for you, especially when you're in the street. All right, now with the help of my assistants, I'm going to show some things about the horse stance that have to be learned. Okay, the gentleman I'm going to have help me on this particular tape is Mr. Ernie George, 5th degree ranking black belt, and Mr. Rick Jeffcoat, who's a 2nd degree brown belt. Gentlemen, if you'd put your feet together and open your horse with your left leg. All right, hands cocked to your hips. Now, important thing is, Ernie, would you turn this way so they can see a side view of you here, is to keep your back straight, keep the small of the back tucked in. Okay, now a lot of guys, when they get into this horse stance, they have a tendency of pushing the rear end out. And this is what we don't want, because basically we want to start training you from the very beginning to keep your center of gravity straight through the top of your head and straight through your bottom and all the way down. It would be in this between your feet. All right. If you start this now, as you go on and progress throughout your training, you'll never forget this. But if you start with your rear end out, okay, your center of gravity is no longer directly beneath you. It's starting to change. And it can be used that way, but I'm going to train you in such a way that you're going to learn to work at your maximum. All right? Now, hands are cocked to your hips, elbows are pinched back. If this is new to you and you've never done something like this, I suggest you brush your teeth, comb your hair, or any chance you get, take this stance and develop it. Now, second thing I want to make sure that you do, that when you have the proper width in your stance, is that you push your knees out, way out. Rick, can you shove them out a little further? Now, I should be able to come along and take my heel, scrape down the foot and stop it and not catch his foot. If he's too wide in the stance and he pushes his knees out, it's not going to work. I'm going to hit that foot. So if we move it back in where it's knee to heel and the knees are out now, way out, and I come along and scrape, I should be able to stomp that floor without touching it. And that's how you should practice with your knees out. Now later on, you're going to find out that the knees, after you get used to holding them out for prolonged periods of time, you're also building the muscles around your ankle and down your feet. So you're going to start building strength gradually. All right? You don't need to lift weights or do any other thing to complement this. It's its own exercise. You are your own weight machine, you might say. And I'm going to show you how that's used later on as well. Now the thing is, as you develop it and you get strength, as you go along, the knees now will start to go in. And eventually, this is where we want to reach. But I like to start the students into this position first, to start working on the legs to get them used to pushing it out. Small, the back is tucked in, back is straight, chin is up and erect. Okay. Posture, if you start posture early, it's going to work for you all the way around. You got to remember, the best fighters in the world all have one thing in common, and they have good form. 9 times out of 10, they have excellent form, whether it be the martial arts, American boxing, or whatever. This is important, so we're going to start from the horse stance. Ernie, would you face them in your horse? Okay, so now we know that we can go 1, 2, 3, and pretty much be there. Or we can just step out and go knee to heel, and we'll be there, right? Now later on, you won't obviously use these, but it'll become natural. You'll be consistent in that stance. There'll be katas that we're going to learn. They're going to teach you how to maneuver in this stance, again, to keep it consistent with you. All right, now, as we learn our basics from this stance, we're going to learn how to punch, how to block, how to kick from this position. It's not the easiest position to kick from, but if you can learn to kick from this position, then you can kick from the more favorable positions. All right, gentlemen, if you put your feet together. The next stance I'm going to start you with is called the neutral bow. Now, the neutral bow is unique to the Kenpo system. And this stance in itself is the foundation of all of our foot maneuvers. All of the stances stem from this position. Oddly enough, most of them stem from the horse, you would think, but the neutral bow is going to be the workhorse of the Kenpo system. Now, a neutral bow is exactly what the stance name implies. Feet are the same distance apart as a horse stance. And you can check that out by putting your knee down right across from your heel. Now, we're not going to talk about width of the stance anymore at this point. We're going to talk about depth of stance. And when I say the word depth, I'm going to refer to the distance from my front foot, leading foot, back to my rear foot. That's called depth. I can shorten the depth, or I can elongate it. All right? So when we hear that, that's what we're talking about. Now, neutral stance refers to that the weight distribution is 50-50. And you notice that I'm not heavy on the front leg, I'm not heavy on the back. If I'm heavy in either direction, I'm not neutral, and I'm committed to that direction. I want to remain neutral, so whatever happens, whether it be in a tournament, whether it be in the street, wherever, I can move from that position. I can make the choices to fit. And it's always good to ride the middle of the line because you can go to the extreme at any time. All right, now, you'll find out that if you start with your feet together, if you take your left leg and step back, and you should be able to find that distance now from knee to heel, and you pivot, your feet only pivot 45 degrees. And you'll notice that there's an imaginary line, we can see the line on the floor as well, from my toe to my rear heel. Now that gives me what we call the width of my stance. All right, remember that the depth was how far apart my feet were. But the width determines how much exposure I'm going to give my opponent. Okay, if I stepped back and I had a toe-to-toe relationship, it would cut down my exposure, but it would also cut down the use of my rear hand and my back leg. All right, if I stepped not far enough back, I'd have a lot of exposure all the way around. I'd have good use of both my hands and both my legs, but I'd be too exposed. So I got to kind of find a middle of the road, and that middle of the road just happens to be the toe-to-heel alignment. It's neutral. It gives me enough exposure where I can use both my hands and legs, but I'm not overexposed to where I'm too much of a target to my opponent. That doesn't mean to say that going toe-to-toe is wrong, because we're going to use that later from a side horse fighting stance. And it doesn't mean that facing somebody this way is wrong. But in the early stages of your trainings, I wouldn't do it. Okay? I would take the neutral position and work from that. Like I said, like the horse stance, certain things become habit after a while. And this particular stance should be habit. You should be able to step back to it and immediately have that knee-to-heel relationship. Okay? All right, now, we found out what determines the depth of my stance, and that is knee to heel. What determines the width is toe to heel. What determines the height of the stance is bending my knees. And when you bend your knees, and they finally reach a point to where they just naturally won't bend any further, that's how high you should be standing. All right, now, in the Kenpo system, natural movement plays an extremely important part in our training. And we never want to have you do a motion that is unnatural to the way that you're built or the way that you think in your daily life. Now, if you take, for instance, a neutral bow, if I handed somebody a saw and put it in their hand and I said, would you saw me that piece of board in front of you? Well, obviously, the guy would step up to it, put the saw over the board, hold it with his hand, and he'd begin to saw. But not realizing in himself that he was in a neutral stance. It's natural. He sure wouldn't step over to a side horse and saw it this way. He wouldn't lean back and saw it this way. Nor would he lean forward, and he may do it this way. But most people will take it and take a natural neutral position. And if you understand that early about natural motion, then you begin to realize how this art is built. Okay, we're going to go more into this as we go along into the techniques. So basically, your neutral stance then is going to be your first fighting stance. The first stance you're going to learn to shuffle in, to use foot maneuvers in, and so forth. With the help of Ernie George, I'm going to show you some other things about the neutral stance that protect you as well. Now, as we found out already, there's a number of ways of standing, and many people can almost make anything work. But for the purpose of your learning, the purpose of your training, we want you to work with something that will give you the safest way, all right? Now, you take the neutral stance that Mr. George is in. It's called a right neutral bow, mainly because the right leg is facing me, which at this time I'm his opponent. Now, if Ernie was to take a stance which opened the front foot, and many systems teach this, and this is fine. But depending upon where this is used, if I was in a school where you were not allowed to kick to the groin area because it was considered a dishonor or just not a target that we were using that particular class, then there would be no need to really protect that area. All right, but now on the street, and if we're fighting somebody on the street, and I'll explain something about kicking, very few people on the street, unless they're martial art trained, will actually cock their knee and kick. All right, on the street, most people kick from the ground up. Okay? They like to do it with hard shoes. And if that's the case, and if a gentleman's standing like that on the street, and I kick from the ground up, my foot now becomes a guide, or his leg becomes a guide for my foot. Now, if he takes a neutral position, with the knees bent, and the foot turned in, a little bent, there you go. That same kick coming from the ground up is going to be retarded at that point. Now, that's not to say we can't go around, but Ernie would follow me at that point and keep that in position rather than keep yourself open. Open it. Okay. All right. Now, whether it be from the front or whether it be from the rear, I can still use this as a guide. Like I said again, if he keeps that knee bent and I come up, that's going to retard it. It's important, in fact, to learn now and remember it. Okay? Thank you, Ernie. Good. Now, if we take this a step further, you see Ernie George is in a left neutral bow. He's got the proper depth, has proper width, good width in there, and the proper height. But if he decides, if he's inexperienced and he decides to close that stance up and he's too shallow, and he got caught in a shallow stance, and his opponent managed to cross in, then it becomes a sweep. It's imminent at that point. Also, if we take the other extreme, if Ernie starts his stance in neutral, but he gets too wide, it looks like he has a strong foundation, and to the untrained eye, you'd say, yeah, that guy looks solid, he looks strong. But in reality, when you widen that base too much, I can't sweep him the same way, but from this point, I can sweep him from that position. Okay? Widen it again. If you notice, not only from this side, can't even make the sweep, but from this side as well. Too wide of stance, you're going to lose your ability to keep your balance. Thank you. Good. The next stance that I want to go over is called the forward bow. Now, a forward bow begins generally from a neutral position, especially in the early stages of your training. And it's no more than if you see me from the side view in a neutral bow, weight distribution is 50-50. I have the proper width and depth. My shoulders follow the same angle as my feet. All right, that's another way of testing to see if you're in your proper stance. But a forward bow, then, is a pivot on the back foot. But it doesn't stop there. It's a pivot with a lean on the front leg. All right, because you're bowing out of this neutral stance and forward. Now, the neutral stance is 50-50, but a forward bow is a 60-40 situation. Now, what happens as I shift my weight forward, my rear leg pivots almost to a 90, but not quite. I don't want it to pivot that far. It pivots just about 80%. Now, the rear leg is 90% locked out. It's not totally locked out. There's a light bend in it. All right? And the weight shifts forward as you do this. Shoulders are square, chin is erect, and this is the position that you want to take when you're in it. If you take it from a front view, you can see how my front leg doesn't bow out. The front leg stays on that 45-degree angle. It doesn't pivot with the back foot. And one of the common mistakes in this stance is you see people doing this. You pivot that front foot. Don't let that happen to you. Leave it alone. Shift your weight into it by bending your front knee and pivot that back leg. Keep your shoulders erect. Very proud position that you're in when you take it. Okay, now with the help of Ernie George again, we're going to find some things about this stance I think you'll find it very interesting. Ernie? Okay, good. Did you face me in a neutral bow? Now from a neutral position, we're going to take a basic, for instance, like a punch. If he punches from this position and he pivots at the hip, but not at the back foot, the extent of his reach basically is this far. But now if he pivots the back foot, shifts his weight forward, we've gone almost another 6 or 8 inches. That's important. All right, now, so what it does is this stance, coupled with a basic strike, for instance, will give you more reach. And with more reach, as he drops his weight, that's called marriage of gravity. That's the synchronizing of his weight dropping, his body weight dropping with his strike. He becomes rooted into the ground at that point. He becomes locked, him and the mat become one together at that point. If he just pivots the back foot but doesn't shift his front foot, don't weight shift, we're only going to get the power, turn your back foot, but don't shift. We're only going to get the power of the arm. But what we want, as he shifts forward and bends that front knee, he also shoves his heel down, and that's important. If you shove that heel down, at the point of impact, everything is braced from this line all the way down to the heel. So in essence, when I do get hit, drop your heel. I'm getting hit with all of Ernie. Now that's called entire focus. All right, not just the focus of the fist. I know many of you heard that we're just going to focus the weapon. We want entire body focus. All right, and this particular stance allows that to happen. Now we're going to get in later on into other tapes. We're going to talk about body focus, and we'll use different analogies to show how it works. But right now I'm most interested in this stance and how it can help you out. Now, not only from this position, Ernie, if you would face him in a horse for me, we found that it can, coupled with a strike, and give it more reach, more power, and so forth. But if I'm in a neutral stance, and Ernie grabs me, let's say I'm just standing here, my arms folded, and I'm grabbed from behind. Irregardless of the many things that we could do, the options that are open to us. But if I'm in a neutral bow to begin with, or modified neutral, I can always drop back to what we call a forward bow. Now it's not just assisting a strike, but in itself it's becoming a weapon, not just a stance. But now it's carrying a new dimension to it. Not only is it holding me up, but it's becoming a weapon itself. That's extremely important. We learn that now in this tape because we're going to carry that with us all the way through, that thought. Remember that. Thank you, Ernie. Come on up. The next stance is called the reverse bow. Now, oddly enough, it's no more than a forward bow, but looking in the opposite direction. Okay. You might say that if I pivoted to a forward bow in this direction, and then I turned and looked behind me, it's no longer a forward bow, but it's a left reverse bow. All right, now this stance can also be used as a weapon. And in the instance before, when I worked it on Mr. George, basically it was a forward bow as long as I kept looking that way. But the moment I turn my head, it becomes a reverse bow. Now, if we take that stance, and I start from a neutral, and I step off, and as I step off, I lean into a right reverse bow, how's that going to help me? Well, for one thing, it becomes an in-place dodge or a duck, in a sense. It allows you to dodge something swinging past you or coming towards you without you losing any distance, without losing any ground. All right, now with the help of Ernie George, I'm going to give you some options to show you how you create your options, and this particular stance does just that. If I'm in a neutral and I'm confronted, for instance, with a gentleman with a club, all right, as he begins to move, obviously if I stay there, I'm going to get hit. All right, now there's a number of things I can do. As it swings past me, I can dodge it, but I'm also in line kick for a kick from this guy. All right, I can go out and hope that I don't run into it. Okay, but there's a lot of ways to get around it. Now, I don't want to gain necessarily or lose any distance as that club goes past. If I start from a neutral and he swings, all right, a little faster on that. I can use my reverse bow to carry me just enough out of range. And just when I'm out of range, pow, boom, I can go back into my neutral and get back into position. Next stance I want to cover is called the cat stance. The stance was used in many ways. In fact, you go back in ancient times when certain monks in their temples back in ancient China would take this stance and use it as a means of not only fighting and so forth, but for listening purposes. And you say, well, how can you use a stance for listening purposes? But they would take their front foot and just barely touch the ground and try and feel the vibrations of horsemen that were coming up upon them, because during those times it was havoc was reigning through the territory. And it's nothing more than a neutral bow, but 90% of your weight is shifted to your rear leg, and only 10% of your front leg is just what we call kissing the ground. Now, if you look at it from the side, you'll see from the neutral position that my foot, you take your heel and place it back to the right leg and put your heel where your front toe was. Here's my front toe here. I put my heel here and come up on the ball of the foot, and that's my cat stance. 90% of the weight should be shifted here. Some people prefer it a little longer, which is fine. All right, ideally it should be right there. All right. Now, you can face yourself with your shoulders square. This is called a 45-degree cat stance because my rear foot's 45 degrees. You can take your back foot and put it at 90 degrees and use it in this position, and you get more of a less exposure to your opponent. But we're going to basically work from the 45-degree cat stance. And you'll also find that in a crowded room where you don't have room to step back or room to open up into a neutral stance or whatever, but you can get crowded up against a wall and still have your cat stance from this position. You can kick from it, different positions, and so forth. It's also used as sweeping, as we'll see later on. And it's got its name because mainly as a cat gets ready to pounce or gets cornered, it cringes up, and everything comes alive at this point and ready to spring. That's where it gets its name. Now you'll notice at this point, I've put myself up against a wall. And as my opponent approaches, as he gradually gets closer, he could start shuffling in. And he gets a little closer, and I get pinned, or I get too many people coming in at me. Then I start to close my stance up. As I close my stance, though, I'm not as vulnerable as I may look. If the punch comes, it can snap right from that position, whether it be up from here or whether it be going over to the knee. But I can continue to move and switch my stances from that position. All the basic kicks that you're going to be learning, snap kick, roundhouse kick, side kick, whatever you're going to learn, can work from this particular stance. Next stance that I want to work on is called the wide kneel. Now, this stance evolves generally out of a neutral bow position. Now, if we take a neutral bow position and we come up on the ball of the back foot, all right, from that position, if I kneel, now I don't mean squat because there's a difference. This is called a kneel. If I kneel on that forward leg, and as I drop my height, you'll find out that this kneel broadens my base and gives me a stronger foundation, particularly if I'm underneath a punch or some type of strike or even a kick, and I want to get underneath my opponent. I want to avoid bending over because I don't want to bring these upper zones of my body into attack. So I drop underneath, but there's got to be a way of dropping underneath without you losing that center of gravity, which we learned all the way back in the horse stance, right? So what we do is we kneel into positions. And you notice that my knee should be approximately a hand span from the ground. This front foot still stays at a 45-degree angle as I drop down, whether I use an upward block, a raking hammer fist, or whatever I use at this position. All right, important to keep your hips from going out, but keep them aligned. My shoulders are still on a 45. You can turn them at this point to a 90 if you like. You can go either way. Now, with the help of Mr. George, we'll take this a little deeper. All right, now we're going to take this a step further with the help of Rick and Ernie. If we take a situation where I'm being snaked around, and we call it snaking in the world of Kenpo when more than one person is sizing you up, these guys are snaking around. And if I get grabbed, and I decided to use what at this point but a reverse bow, maybe with a strike, and then if I finish it with this hit, and Ernie, the wide kneel at that point, if you look at what happened, as Rick started to come up, as I shuffled in to drop my wide kneel, not only did I use it to gain marriage of gravity, remember that term that we learned earlier, I gained marriage of gravity on a strike, but as Rick came up, it also took on another dimension of its own. And as Ernie got hit, Rick got pinned at this point. Thank you, gentlemen. Good. All right, the next stance I want to go over is called a close kneel. It's similar to the wide kneel, but now it's going to make your base not so wide, but it's going to cut it down. And generally, this stance is used in a similar fashion as a wide kneel, but it can be worked in at closer areas where a wide kneel just is that. It's too wide. It's too big of a stance to use. So basically, a close kneel is no more than a forward bow this time, where you're up on the ball of the back foot and you kneel down. And how far? But a hand span, as we learned earlier, a hand span from the ground. Shoulders erect, chin is up. That's a close kneel. All right, now, with the help of Mr. George, I'll give you another example of how this is used. Now, to give you an example of how the closed kneel is used, I'm also going to give an example from a stance that we've learned earlier, the cat stance. Now, we're going to take, for instance, right punch, and he goes down. Now, as I took him down, regardless of the number of the strikes that you can add and learn, but if I decide to finish this technique a little further, but if I drop into a closed kneel, it's going to have a devastating effect on that foot. Thank you. All right, let's take this a step further and show you how the closed kneel can be used advantageously fighting more than one person again. To give you another example of how this stance carries another dimension. Like the wide kneel, if I decide to drop under a strike, I can do it with a closed kneel and protecting my groin area. Now, as a wide kneel from this position is all right, but if he decides to move a knee into me, I'm in a little bit of trouble. But if I drop down to a closed kneel, I've got pretty much of that my groin area covered. All right. Besides that fact, if I'm grabbed and I decide to drop back and use it, it also picks up speed and power for me at this point as well, right from there. And from that position, still from my closed kneel, I can drop forward and make my hits. All right, next stance is called twist stance. Now, when I teach, I like to give a little history behind whatever I'm teaching, particularly basics. And this stance was used in ancient time of China, and it was called the female stance because it was proper that when you were being courted, that a woman didn't stand with her legs strided apart or even feet together. It was proper in many cases to stand in this position, but this goes way back. And it gives a little more flavor to your basics when you understand where they came from. And it helps you to remember what basic we're talking about. But that's one of the places that it came from. But if you look at it, all it is in reality is a neutral bow. And as long as you have the proper depth in your stance, and you begin to twist your feet, in this case it would be clockwise. If I was in a left neutral bow, it would be counterclockwise. But you'd say, well, how in the world would you want to isolate your motion and lock yourself into a stance like this? Well, to begin with, this stance is used in Kenpo throughout, but it's for the more adept. As you get better, get more experience into you, this stance is very useful. Not in the early stages, but I'm going to go over it because we're going to need it later on. I'm going to give you an example of how this stance is used. But before I get into that, again, I want you to watch. If it's a right neutral stance, meaning my right leg is facing my opponent, if I pivot both feet, I begin to literally screw myself into the ground. And I become rooted into the ground as I do it. I begin to solidify my base. Chin is up, good posture. You notice my shoulders are on a 45-degree angle, again following my foot. I can always pivot out into either stance, cat stance, reverse bow, and then back into a twist stance. And this time it went counterclockwise because I was in a left neutral bow. All right, with the help of my assistants, I'll show you what we can use this for. All right, let's take this twist stance a step further and show how centrifugal force can be used and borrowed in a situation where we're working with more than one person. Okay, grab it, gentlemen. Again, if I'm grabbed, for the sake of technique, we'll just use grab. It's the easiest thing to work with right now when we're teaching. But if I get them to drop their hands, and I go to a twist stance, now from this point, I think your imagination can tell you what I'm going to do. I can begin my twist stance, and as I begin to twist my body, the centrifugal force from the center of my body has a tendency to launch my arms away from me. And as they launch away from me, I don't stop basically at one person, but as I begin my roll and hit, but I begin to, and I can come back in on the other side as well. All right, now the next two stances, I say two because I'm going to teach them both simultaneously. It's going to be the concave stance and convex stance. All right, now these are a little peculiar when you look at them. A concave is no more from a horse stance, turning your knees in. And as it states, it's concave, all right? If I go to a horse and I push my heels in, toes out, and bend my knees, or even keep them straight, that's considered a convex stance. Now, how in the world would we use something like this? I'll show you. Mr. George? If I manage to take my opponent, leap of death, and he came in with a right punch, and I broke his elbow, broke the rib, and threw him to the mat. If I wanted to carry this a step further and go beyond what I thought was necessary, if Mr. George started to push up, I could leap. And as I leaped, I would leap with both heels landing on the kidneys. All right, the stance that would happen when I would do that would be the convex stance, rather. And as he pushed up, I would come up and push down on both kidneys. If I took it a step further and I grabbed the face and pulled up and I turned to a concave, the knees become a fulcrum in which to break snap the neck from. All right. Now this is a little extreme, but it's better to know we're not trying to teach you to overkill, but we're trying to teach you to be overskilled so you have a choice depending upon the situation. But we have the convex, concave. And oddly enough, when a guy's in this position, if he tries to hit me with the other hand, he's going to fall on his face. He knows this. So instinctively, he's going to hold himself up for you. So if you had to take it a step further, it's open. All right, next stance I want to go over is called the one-legged stance. And I know some may say, well, that's fine. I mean, am I actually going to practice a one-legged stance? Yes, you are, because there's going to be times when you're not going to be on both feet. And the art takes you to that time. And as you practice, whether you're kicking or whether you're leaping from one side to the other, you've got to be able to stand on one leg. Now, to make it simple, as you shift your weight to your supporting leg, and it happens to be my left leg at this point, I keep it bent so I keep my center of gravity low. All right, I don't want to straighten this leg up because it raises my center of gravity. Also, if I get buckled At that point, the knee's going to break, and so forth. But if I want to stay low and solidified, I keep that supporting leg bent. And you should be able to practice it using different kicks, different hand maneuvers, and so forth. All right, without losing your balance. And start this early, but don't raise it up like that. Okay? Now, with the help of my assistant, I'll give you an example of how this can be used. If I start from a neutral position, I can jump off to one leg. Now, without parrying or striking or whatever, but using this stance one-legged gives me an opportunity to go to the groin area, to the back of the knee, okay, and round to the front. But the important thing is, at an early stage, I learned, and I want you to learn this, is to be able to stand on one leg, to use it at your discretion. Okay? Now, if I start from a neutral position, let's find out how one-legged stance can really help me beyond just sidestepping my opponent. If he begins a sweep, I can sidestep it this way. If he starts to come up against me, I have to have the balance to return fire from that position. The last stance I want to go over, well, actually it should have been the first stance, but it's an important stance, and I think it deserves to be talked about, and that's the attention stance. Why would you want to stand at attention? Obviously, in a street situation, you're not going to use it, but the point of it is, as you begin training, you want to formalize your training. Take it very seriously. Begin your movements from an attention stance in the beginning, then you have a point of reference to work from. And attention stance is no more than putting your heels together and putting your toes together as well. Shoulders are back, head is erect, small of the back is tucked in, so your center of gravity is directly beneath you. Your thumbs are on the center of your thighs, and that's the attention stance. It's relaxed, it's not rigid, because in Kenpo, we only become rigid when we meet our target with the weapon. And after we meet that target, we back off to a relaxed position. So start and get this ingrained in your mind early, that although it's crisp and clean, it's not rigid, it's relaxed and composed. In conclusion, when you practice your foot maneuvers, understand that they are more than just getting you to and from your opponent. But without a thorough knowledge and the ability of using it and applying your foot maneuvers, your hand weapons, your kicks, all your different strikes have little value. So practice.